Ladies and gentlemen, the Montreal Canadiens have defeated the Buffalo Sabres, and as such, it is now officially confirmed what the Final Four in the NHL playoffs this year will look like. In the West, we have the Colorado Avalanche against the Vegas Golden Knights, and in the East, we have the Montreal Canadiens versus the Carolina Hurricanes. One of these four teams will win the Stanley Cup this year. Who's it going to be? Now, I wanted to do this video breaking down the Canadiens and the Canes because not only is there a really interesting narrative with this series and the way it's set up, but we also have some numbers to dive into as well, and some extra context behind it all. So sit back, relax, and enjoy, and of course, let me know in the comments how do you feel this particular series is going to go. Who wins, who loses, and how many games does it take? This is pretty notable because the Montreal Canadiens, they played 7 games against Tampa Bay, and they played 7 games against the Buffalo Sabres. Jakub Dobeš started every single game, and as we had seen in the post-game interview yesterday, he said he could play 40 more. He is just a rookie, so obviously he is just getting his feet wet, and he's still feeling pretty energized. But on the other hand, the Carolina Hurricanes have not played a 7-game series. They've played 2 4-game series. The Canes swept the Ottawa Senators in round 1, and they swept the Philadelphia Flyers in round 2. It is the most played team in Montreal versus the least played team in Carolina, amongst teams that are still standing, of course. Ottawa and LA both lost in 4 games, so they technically are the lowest played teams. But amongst the ones remaining, you have the most overcharged team in the league and the most energy-conservant team in the league, Carolina versus Montreal. The last Carolina Hurricanes game was May 9th. That was 10 days ago. And if you take a look at where things are going, Game 1 is going to be Thursday, May 21st, between Montreal and Carolina. This means that the Hurricanes, they're going to have an almost full 2-week-long break before coming back and continuing their playoff action. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Is that going to potentially prove rusty for the Carolina Hurricanes? And can the Montreal Canadiens use their 2 recent frantic series to help them in this opening matchup against Carolina? Now, speaking of which, if you wanted to go to the NHL standings as a whole, this is where Montreal's story gets a lot more interesting compared to where things were at the beginning of the year. The Montreal Canadiens were 3rd place in the Atlantic Division, yes, but if you take a look at the NHL, they were 6th overall in the league. They ended up defeating teams in number 5 and in number 4 positions in the regular season standings, and now they're playing off against the number 2 team. As we had already made a video about earlier in this playoff run, if the Montreal Canadiens beat Carolina and if they beat Colorado, for example, in the finals, this would arguably be the most difficult run any playoff team has had to go through to get the Stanley Cup. Yeah, Montreal was great, 106 points in 82 games, but they had to play the 5th, 4th, 2nd, and potentially the 1st best team in the league on a potential path to the Stanley Cup. And they're 6th place overall in general, too, so they definitely did fine. It's just a big illustration as to how stacked the East and the Atlantic in particular happened to have been this season. But with that said, let's dive into the tale of the tape and just talk about what the numbers look like between these 2 teams. Puck Report NHL went out there and posted this, the confirmed matchup, Carolina versus Montreal, head-to-head. The Montreal Canadiens actually went undefeated versus the Canes. Meanwhile, in all of these statistics, you'll see that Carolina does have the edge. They were the 2nd best team in the NHL in points percentage. Montreal was 6th. The Carolina Hurricanes were second in the NHL in goals for per game. The Habs were 7th. The Carolina Hurricanes were 5th in the NHL in goals against per game. The Habs were 16th. And then when it comes to power play and penalty kill, the Canes beat the Canadiens in both of those categories as well. The Hurricanes are a certified wagon. Until you acknowledge the fact that the Canadiens beat them all 3 times they met this year. Starting out on January 1st, 2026, Montreal defeated Carolina 7-5. On March 24th, they beat Carolina 5-2. And then on March 29th, they beat Carolina 3-1. All of these games had lower and lower scores. So who knows if we're actually going to see a 1-0 or a 2-1 game here and there in this Stanley Cup Eastern Conference Finals series. It should be noted as well that while Carolina did defeat Philadelphia fairly easy, they did have a difficult time with the Ottawa Senators. And I know it's hard to say that fully when you acknowledge the fact that they swept Ottawa, but these games were really close. 2-0 in Game 1, double overtime in Game 2, 2-1 in Game 3, and then 4-2 in Game 4 with some empty netters in there. Carolina, they had themselves a tight matchup in Round 1, and I know a lot of Ottawa Senators fans are looking at the Hurricanes and their playoff run in this year's playoffs and saying, yeah, no, if it was us playing off against Philadelphia in the second round, we could have been in the Eastern Conference Finals. Carolina mopped the floor with Rick Tocchet and his Philadelphia Flyers, so things didn't really look all too difficult for them. The Montreal Canadiens are going to provide a much tougher matchup. I don't think anybody is expecting anything less. And when it comes to the overall point production, you best better believe that some of these same Montreal guys are going to be back at the top. Lane Hudson is a point-per-game defenseman in the entire playoffs this season. Nick Suzuki, he's just under a point per game. You have a lot of depth guys in Montreal, like Alex Newhook, for example, whose 7 goals is tied for 3rd overall in the league this year's playoffs. Also, it's kind of ridiculous. So look at the top goal guys in the NHL. It's all Vegas, Vegas, Vegas. Brett Howden, Pavel Dorofeyev, and Mitch Marner. For whatever reason, all the Vegas guys are going out there and producing. But Logan Stankoven is also up here too. 7 goals in 8 games played. Carolina obviously isn't doing too well in the overall points department because they have so few games compared to everybody else. But in terms of points per game, I mean, Taylor Hall has 12 points in 8 games. That guy's been absolutely electric. Talk about Jackson Blake and, of course, the aforementioned Stankoven. Those are the toughest cats on the Carolina Hurricanes at the moment. Meanwhile, Montreal, obviously, are taking a look at the Alex Newhooks, the Zachary Boldukes. I think it's unfair to say that Juraj Slafkovsky has been one of the better players in this year's playoff run, even though he's got 9 points in 14 games. Same could be said about Cole Caulfield, in all honesty. Meanwhile, the goaltending matchup is super interesting because Jakub Dobeš has the same amount of wins as Freddie Anderson does. But Anderson has a much higher save percentage. .950 save percentage in 8 games and a 1.12 goals against. He has allowed 10 goals in 8 total games so far. He has been on fire, but is that just him being different, or is that just a symptom of the team that he's playing on being so dominant on the score sheet? Meanwhile, Jakub Dobeš has a .910 save percentage and a .252 goals against in 14 games. The numbers are worse, yes, but Dobeš has been looking pretty good as well throughout the course of this playoff run. The guy is 24 years old, but he plays a lot better than that. With all that said, you can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about Carolina versus Montreal in the Eastern Conference Finals? I predicted Buffalo to beat Montreal in 7 in our second round series playoff preview, so I'm going to predict the Canadiens defeats the Carolina Hurricanes. This time, I'm going to say they do it in 6. Yeah, let's go out there with some crazy predictions, folks. Let me know in the comments all your opinions. Am I crazy for going out there and saying that? Probably, but what else is new? I hope you enjoyed this Recherche Roll 99, and bye.